Good to have you with us. There's a lot going on tonight. We've got two big stories that we're following. One out of New York that started as a criminal justice matter today. The other one that happened in Washington that is not at this point a criminal matter, but may eventually end up being a criminal matter. But in terms of understanding the importance of these two big stories that broke today, I want to go back to 2015 for a second. 2015, 2 years ago, it was the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. And, you know, it's not often that you celebrate the 70th anniversary of a world event, right? But you can kind of see why a lot of people wanted to make a big deal out of the 70th anniversary of World War II instead of waiting around for a more, obvious numerical milestone like the 75-year anniversary. I mean, people who fought in World War II are disappearing from the earth. Even the youngest of them are old enough now that with each passing year, you lose the opportunity to personally pay them tribute before they pass. So the 70th anniversary, we made a really big deal about it around the world in 2015. It was a big deal here in the United States. It was a big deal anywhere that World War II veterans were able to come out and be recognized by their countrymen. But you know what? In Russia and in China in 2015, even as everybody was making kind of a big deal of it, Russia and China went to a whole nother level. They went hog wild for the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. And not just in a way that had them celebrating, the survivors of that war, the folks who actually fought in those wars. No, what Russia and China did for that anniversary in 2015 is that they decided to hold absolutely gigantic, unprecedentedly gigantic displays of their own national military power. It was an unusual thing. China organized what may have been one of the largest military parades in modern international history. China showed off, look at these, the tanks and missile launchers, a lot of them in this weird, intense digital blue camo. They showed off their domestically made drones and aircraft. In fact, they took great care to make sure every single weapon, every single missile, every single vehicle they showed was domestic, was Chinese made, no foreign weapons. They rolled out dozens of what they call carrier killers. They're Chinese-made missiles that the Chinese said they say these missiles are big enough and powerful enough to sink an American aircraft carrier in a single strike. That's these missiles here. China's military has over 2 million people in it. They put a lot of them in this parade for the 70th anniversary of the end of World War II. They even at one point had helicopters flying over the parade route, spelling out 70 for 70 years. It was just massive. And according to reports from the time, from 2015 when it happened, 80% of the weapons that China displayed in that huge parade had never before been seen by the general public until they put them in that parade. Now, this was the reviewing stand that day. You see President Xi of China looking very happy there, standing next to him, looking exactly the way he always does in every picture where his shirt is on, is Russian President Vladimir Putin. Putin was not to be outdone in 2015, though. Russia also in 2015 staged an absolutely enormous military display to mark the 70th anniversary of the defeat of the Nazis. The Russians rolled more military equipment through the streets of Moscow than they had ever done before, including over the entire history of the Soviet Union. Biggest Russian military parade ever in 2015. They did a flyover like they do in all these things, but in the Russian one, at one point they did a flyover that involved more than 100 aircraft. And yeah, the Chinese spelled out 70 with their helicopters, while the Russians spelled out 70 with their fighter jets. And missiles and tanks and tens of thousands of troops, no expense spared. Biggest one they've ever had. And I mean, it was a little weird that both Russia and China chose to do that in 2015. It was like this kind of North Korean style display from both of those countries. Incidentally, I should mention, North Korea in 2015 also held a giant military parade, a huge one. But in North Korea, while that's impressive, that's not weird, right? That's like what North Korea does. What's North Korea famous for? Prison camps where they work and starve their own people to death in massive numbers, bizarre leadership that kills their relatives with anti-aircraft guns or packs of dogs, super creepy forced displays of coordinated mass gymnastics, and of course, unbelievable 2015, they did the thing with the 70 as well. And I think those were like biplanes. Anyway, no expense spared. Russia, China, North Korea. There's no law against parading your military, whether or not it's an important anniversary. But, I mean, through American eyes, this is a little weird, right? If this stuff gives you a little bit to look at, it's because it's supposed to. This is an unabashed, uncomplicated, undisguised display of military threat, military prowess, or national insecurity, depending on how you look at it. I mean, this is not something that we do here in the United States. Although, when our new president was planning his inauguration this year, there were some strange signs that maybe the United States was going to approach the Trump inauguration with sort of a Pyongyang accent. The president-elect told the Washington Post the week of his inauguration, before he was inaugurated, quote, "We are going to show the people as we build up our military. We are going to display our military. That military may come marching down Pennsylvania Avenue. That military may be flying over New York City and Washington, D.C. for parades. I mean, we're going to be showing our military." The day after the president-elect made those comments to the Washington Post, with nobody quite knowing what to make of that, the Huffington Post took him seriously and followed up with sources who were described at the time as being familiar with the plans of the Presidential Inaugural Committee. And what those sources said at the time was, in fact, the Trump administration really was making inquiries, really was talking to the Pentagon about rolling the tanks down the streets of Washington, D.C. Tanks, missile launchers, MRAPs, what else you got? Jessica Schilberg was the reporter on this piece for the Huffington Post. This is right before the inauguration. This is from her piece at the time. Quote, "During the preparation for Friday's transfer of power, a member of Trump's transition team floated the idea of including tanks and missile launchers in the inaugural parade. The source said, quote, "They were legit thinking Red Square / North Korea style parade." I remember that week, right, leading up to the inauguration. There was a lot to get used to. There was a lot weird in the news that week. That report in particular, though, stood out, stuck with me. I think it stuck with a lot of people, even after the White House denied it. Asked for an on-the-record confirmation of what Huffington Post was learning through its sources, the White House demurred and said that all requests for comment on this issue should be directed to the Defense Department. They weren't going to talk about it at all. The reporter Jessica Schilberg later explained that when she asked the White House in December about these plans they had heard about to use military equipment during the inauguration, quote, "A Trump aide refused to address the matter on record, but offered a vehement off-the-record denial." A vehement denial. Oh no, don't be crazy. We were never considering that. Well, that Huffington Post reporter stuck with that weird little story. She filed a Freedom of Information Act request, not with the White House, but with the military. Because remember, there was an asker, but also an askee. And now she's been able to publish the evidence showing that, in fact, the Trump folks, the Trump Inauguration Committee, really was, quote, seriously considering adding military vehicles to the inaugural parade. Quote, "The conversation started as, can you send us some pictures of military vehicles we could add to the parade?" Defense Department official then says to his or her colleague, quote, "I explained that such support would be out of guidelines. Quote, I'm extremely reluctant to produce an improvised list of military vehicles that we might be held to. Also concerned that we as a command need an opportunity to staff this request and to make deliberate decisions about vehicle choice and configuration, paint scheme, uniform for crew members, etc. before we start providing pictures which might be regarded as binding." So this email from one Pentagon official to another, which has now been released by the Freedom of Information Act request, shows the Pentagon freaking out because the Trump folks really did ask them to do this thing. They wanted a picture book of options about what the big military stuff looked like. We now have this direct evidence because the Trump people really did want to run freaking missile launchers and tanks down Pennsylvania Avenue. Not for the commemoration of the end of World War II or some other nominally not nonsensical reason. They wanted to do that just to celebrate Trump. Look at all our missiles, everybody. And, you know, history of what happened there, the real story of it.